Please help me welcome the director of the film, Olivier Assayas. My first question has to do with the semi-autobiographical nature of the film. Can you talk about the genesis of the story?
The genesis of the story is it's a long story because really it has its roots way back to a movie I made in the mid-90s called Cold Water, which used characters with the same names in a similar context, but it was a very different film. It was a movie that has been very important for me in my career, but it still I had this lingering feeling that something was missing from the film, and what was missing of the film basically was what was so important for me during those years, during the 1970s. You know how I I had this calling to become more of a visual artist than a filmmaker, and how this vocation kind of shifted, moved, and attracted me to filmmaking. Plus, of course, the whole ambient of the 1970s, the politics, the counterculture. I mean, all things that A, were important for me, and B, had never really been represented in movies. I thought it was a kind of cinematic virgin territory. So I thought there was something challenging and kind of exciting because no one had really nailed it, and I thought that if I wanted to represent that period, it's so It's a generation away, but it's kind of present. Everybody has his own idea of what the 70s were about, and I think if I wanted to get them right, I had to use a first-hand experience and try to recreate my own emotions, my own feeling. But that was very much the starting point. It's what I kind of build on, something that is, I hope, broader than that, which is more about a generation than a person.
And the film is called, the French version of it's called, title is Après Mai, after
May.
After May is the translation. Of course, regarding the May riots of 1968, but the film is set in 1971.
Yes.
So why that period after? Why
it's May '68 was, of course, pretty much a defining moment in modern French history. But it was both when the change, that the transformation of society that was going on in basically all over the world. I mean, through the uprising of youth happened in France, and in France it happened in a more violent, more extreme way, and it took a shape of an almost revolution, and like all historical events, it was debated at the time. It's still debated now. What exactly happened? We don't know. But it's still the focus of the reflection on that period in terms of history, and whatever was going on in the early 70s is supposed to be some kind of aftermath of May '68, like the fading of the hopes of '68, something like that. When my memory is that it was very different, in the sense that it was an era, a period of hope, of belief, of utopia. It's because we were not living in the nostalgia of what had happened 3 years earlier. We were living in expectation of the future that was to come. It was May '68 was in our perception, a failed revolution, but the one that was coming would be like the big one. And we wanted to be part of it. Because the uprising of May '68 opened so many doors for the younger generation, for the kids of in the 70s and the period when I grew up, everything was open. I mean, all of a sudden there were options that young people never had. I mean, there was a sense of freedom. There were no rules anymore. It was okay to drop out of school. It was okay to cut off ties with your family. It was okay to travel to Africa, to the Orient or wherever. I mean, it was okay not to want to work, not to have a job, people were kind of experimenting with life. And that was what was really exciting about that period, and has been kind of overlooked because those early 70s are ultimately like a blind spot in recent history.
Mm. Was there ever a radical filmmaking collective that you were a member of?
No, but I was pretty close to people who were involved in that kind of filmmaking. I mean, a lot of the aspiring filmmakers from my generation went through this kind of that phase. I mean, luckily or unluckily, I did not, because I was not in film school. But most of the militant filmmaking of those years were people from my generation who were in film school and who did not want to be to work in the industry. And the only way they could connect their desire to become filmmaker was by connecting what they were doing with politics.
With politics, yeah.
And because it was a period where arts and politics were completely impossible to dissociate, and that applied to cinema.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think is so wonderful and really interesting about the film, the way in which there's this struggle for the character to reconcile the political and aspirations and ideals and artistic aspirations, that struggle. Was that something that you felt as you were painting?
Yes, I mean, we felt we were still part of the history of the 20th century. And the history of the 20th century is pretty much about how art and politics are one and the same thing. I mean, this is essential if you want to understand the painting, the avant-garde, the evolution, the radical evolution of painting throughout the 20th century, if you want to understand what happened in theater, in literature, or even in music. And so we felt we were still part of that history, and that we had to figure out our own connection with the politics of the time and our art. And it of course it was something that was also something that was a very heavy burden to have on your shoulders, especially when you're a teenager and you want to draw, you want to paint, you want to become an artist in a way or another. You were held accountable to whatever you wanted to do by your friends who were focused on politics. It was like, well, what have you done for the working class today? Or something like,
It's good sometimes, though, to be held accountable. So.
Yes,
yeah,
yes. Oh, yes. No. But
yeah.
Of course it is, and that's why I kind of, it's an important part of the film in the sense that I don't have the correct answer to those questions, but I know that I come from a world, I grew up in a world, became myself in a world where those questions are important, and in a way or another, you have to consider them.
That brings me to, I wanted to talk about the casting.
I was looking for kids who were in a way or another rebellious, who had that in them and who in that sense could connect with the spirit of the 1970s. Not that common today, I mean, kind of difficult to find. And then I started asking myself if they could act or not. That was the second part of the search.
And then, in terms of the script, was that something that changed once you had the individuals, the actors?
Yes, it evolved. It evolved, but the screenplay has a strange history. I mean, it's in the sense that how should I put it? It's been a very flexible part of the evolution of this film, because when I started writing it, I thought I was getting myself into something epic. I thought it was it was going to be this kind of big movie about that generation of the 1970s. I thought it would be a lot of dialogue and when I started writing on it, I realized I did not want the dialogue. I wanted to keep things as simple, as sharp as possible. So I kind of erasing all the psychology out of the film, just to stay with the facts, stay with so the film became much more dense, much more concise than whatever I had imagined, and it started growing again when we began preparing the film, because I realized that ultimately so much of what was going on in the film was also about getting the setting right, getting the collective scenes right, getting the details right, and it was very obvious that I would have to spend more time than what I imagined getting whatever connected those kids right, and it was as important, or eventually more important, than the emotions or the sentimental issues in their relationships.
There was a lot of fire in the film, and it seemed to be a theme, and I just wondered what you were saying about it.
It kind of happened on its own, and at some point I decided to keep it. I don't know if it happens to other writers, but for me, I realized that when I'm writing a screenplay, for some reason there's a theme, a specific, there's a specific element that keeps on coming back and is like some kind of underground theme throughout the whole film. And it's not something I'm only half conscious of it. It's only when the screenplay is finished that I realize, oh my God, there's a lot of fire in this film, and it's even more present, of course, when we're shooting. And I thought there was a message there. I thought that unconsciously it was my way of connecting with, in a poetic way, with whatever youth is about. Youth is always about consuming itself, and it's also the fire of youth, the energy of a generation, this energy you have when you discover the world, and you want to challenge it, you want to question it. So it's I just and in the back of my mind, I hoped I would not get that question.
The use of music was fantastic in the film, and I was wondering if you'd kind of planned ahead of time a lot of the tracks and a lot of the scoring that you were going to use, or if you wrote it all to some of it.
I did not really write it down. I mean, there's only the Syd Barrett song that's pretty much part of that is in the screenplay, because it's obviously he plays with the sleeve, the record sleeve, but yes, because I don't like to have any kind of preconceived idea of the music I am going to use, but then it came very naturally, because when I started editing, my intuition was to use the music that was the soundtrack for me of those years. I mean, it was the music I was actually listening to in those years. I thought it would not work. I thought it was too obvious in many ways, but then it was not obvious at all. It kind of did fit perfectly into the film, in the sense that all those tracks are like time capsules for me. I mean, they kind of, they just connect so much with the emotions of the character. They connect so much with whatever I was trying to express, and it's like some kind of a musical self-portrait of the music I was, of who I was and how I related to music at that age. Ultimately, if there is a straightforward autobiographical element in the film, maybe it might be the music.
It's such an emotional and passionate period that I wondered if you were surprised, or how you felt if you were haunted by the material once you started actually playing with it to make the movie.
Well, it always stayed with me. I think that it's a very difficult question, because it has to do with both personal element, intimate elements, and also how you relate to the story of your own generation. And I think, I was mentioning this movie I did in the mid-90s, Cold Water. It's really the moment when I kind of reconciled with the teenager I had been. I mean, because at some point in life, it's when you are growing up, and especially for me, because it's part of the process of how I started, becoming a filmmaker. You have to reject, I suppose, things that the person you were when you were still immature, like I was when I was, I was when I went through the chaos of the early 1970s. Just to express it as clearly as I can, the 70s were great. They had this fantastic energy, and then gradually it kind of faded. I mean, leftism became dogmatic, the hopes were going away, the revolution was not happening, and it was, you felt you were part of something that was gradually more and more cut off from reality. And then punk rock came, and it was just like such a relief. I mean, that's how I lived it, It's all of a sudden you had this new energy, you had something new that was happening, and that was kind of taking the real world into consideration. It was antagonizing it, but still, it was, it was a way of reconnecting with the real world and how the world was changing. So, and from then on, whatever had been going on, the excesses of the 1970s were like ridiculed. It was the political language was absurd. The attraction to Oriental spirituality was just a laughing stock, and I think it's part of the history of my generation to really violently reject what had been going on in the 70s, and that we had all been part of, and I think it was part of the process of just coming to terms with myself and whoever I was as a teenager that made me make Cold Water in the mid-90s, made me write in the later, like 10 years later, in the early 2000s, an essay about the teenage politics of the period, from which this movie grew. I mean, this movie ended up taking shape because I had written that essay, and I had somehow not only reconciled myself with the teenager I had been, but also with the values of that period, with the values of that era, of the politics, the militantism, the hopes, the utopias. I ultimately, I kind of not only came to terms with it, but saw the beauty of it and became, as you were saying, I mean, haunted by it. The fact that I realized that that period that I had so completely dismissed carried something that was great, that was something that was meaningful, and that had some historical value, and that it could be shared in a way or another. So, it's to me at this point, it's finally come full circle.
Thank you.
Thank you.